Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. We go to the phones. Republican strategist Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Chad. Good morning.
We've got the inauguration happening today down in Austin. It's a day of celebration, at least for the governor and lieutenant governor, and for the Republicans, it's a day of celebration. I assume the Democrats will be happy too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Texas is less partisan, than you see in D.C., and even in D.C., inaugurations can be festive. So, yeah, today's a day of celebration. It's a culmination of lots of work, lots of money raised, lots of hard campaigning, lots of people, working on your behalf. And so, yeah, you could call it the peaceful transfer of power. In this case, it's two individuals being, sworn in and inaugurated for another 4-year term, so it's not really a transfer of power. You've already had the legislature sworn in, but now you'll have the two top state officials sworn in. So it's in some ways the beginning of the new 4-year term.
Yeah, and what for those who maybe have not heard or seen the inauguration before. What kind of usually plays out? I mean, and does the governor and lieutenant governor, do they talk about any kind of priorities during this, or is this just about, the future of Texas and kind of the more, general type of speeches?
Yeah, I think the inauguration speech is a little bit less important than the State of the State address.
Right.
I haven't seen a date for that yet, but that's where he'll list the emergency items and make clear what he wants to achieve in the legislative session. I think this is probably, less substantive and more sort of aspirational would be my expectation. I think this speech will be, shorter than the State of the State would be. It's hard to remember, much about any governor giving an inaugural address that ultimately affects their legacy, their vision, the legislative session. So, look, there'll be people from around the state traveling to attend this. There's an inaugural ball tonight. There's a barbecue on the Capitol lawn in the afternoon. So there's a series of events that are festive and fun and just a kind of a nice way to celebrate. I don't think it probably affects the legislative session or this governor's term all that much.
Is it good weather for the barbecue?
It's okay. It's Austin never gets too bad. We're not, dealing with rain or ice or anything like that. It's a little colder maybe than people would like. It's probably in the, low to mid 40s up to the high 40s tonight. So it should be fine.
Yeah, we'll take that for barbecue. That's not bad.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Let's see. One of the big story that came out late last night, last evening, is that the House-based budget shows a big increase in public ed funding.
Yeah, about $7 billion more. It is a significant increase. The Senate should have their initial budget released probably today. I imagine their increase in public education funding will be not zero, but also not $7 million, something less than that. And look, these are the kind of the opening wagers from both bodies. It's not a final number. There'll be a negotiation. There'll be hearings. There'll be markups. There'll be all those steps in between. Look, I don't think there's any doubt that there is going to be more money spent on public education coming out of this legislative session for the next biennium than we had in the past. You are going to have more money spent. The question is, are there going to be additional accountability measures, choice and competition measures, and then how is all that going to affect the ability to reform the property tax system? These things clearly work together. They sort of complement each other, and when one goes down, it affects the other. And so I think there's a realization now, I think as I said last week, that you can't do one without doing the other, and that's now something that I think state leaders in both the House and the Senate, that's an understanding that everyone has, that everyone recognizes, that everyone has really said publicly. Yeah. So I don't think, look, my guess, Chad, as I sit here, is that we're not going to see a $7 billion increase in public education funding coming out of this legislative session. That seems high to me, particularly when they also want to reduce property taxes to some extent, and then they have other things like Harvey that they want to do. But it could be the House wanted to kind of go further. Sometimes in a negotiation, you kind of start at the outside and then you work your way back to the middle on both sides. So it could be the Senate will be more conservative and the House be more generous, and they'll meet in the middle. But we'll see. We're at the very beginning stage of this 140-day legislative session.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at the national scene. I had Senator John Cornyn on my program earlier, and we talked about the government shutdown. Obviously, he and other Republican senators are standing pretty firm still with the president. They're sticking with him on this thing as far as day 25 goes. My question to you is, how long do you think this continues as far as the Republicans sticking behind the president?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, here my challenge is, I think, from a substantive standpoint, the White House is on solid ground. I'm frustrated because I don't think they're doing what they need to do to win this battle. I feel like every day they need to be driving the news, making Democrats explain why they've supported far more in border security funding in any time in the last 10 years than they're willing to support now that Trump is president. So they're not, number one, making them sort of own the hypocrisy, but number two, the president, I think, apart from the national address that he gave, is not really making the case as to why this is needed. You're not seeing that kind of coverage. You're seeing far more coverage about airport screeners in Houston or in D.C. than you're seeing details about how many miles of wall or fence do we currently have, how much do we want, what would it mean for resource deployment along the southern border. So I just feel like they need to be treating this as though it's a war, a PR battle where every day they're trying to persuade the public that this is necessary. The challenge, I think, right now is, I actually think Trump seems more reasonable than the Democrats do. And the reason I say that is the Democrats are not negotiating at all. They have no opening offer. They're not offering anything. They're not offering any concessions. I think the president's made clear he's willing to accept less than $5 billion if they can negotiate it. He's willing to consider other things that Democrats want, temporary protected status reform. You could have, something for the Dreamers in there, permanent solution for them, perhaps legal status or normalization. So there are some options there that are on the table, and he's willing to negotiate. They're not willing to negotiate. So I don't see how Democrats can appear more reasonable if they're not willing to negotiate at all. And I just think that the president needs to make them own that failure and that reluctance to negotiate. And so far, it just doesn't feel like he's making them own it quite as effectively as he needs to be.
And this is part of the problem, I would think, for the White House and for senators and those in the House. How do you make that case when the media, you and I know that the Democrats do not want to negotiate, that they refuse to negotiate, yet we're not hearing that in any news stories. We're not seeing that being reported by really any of the networks. It's all blaming the president for shutting down the government. What more can the White House do and can Republicans do to try to get that message when the news media, to me, it seems they're not interested in covering that angle?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't have a perfect answer. What I would say is, obviously the national address gave him an opportunity to make that case. It's part of the reason that the Democrats went crazy, tried to convince the networks not to give him the time, and then demanded their own response, demanded, live fact-checking on air in real time, just kind of absurd, requests and demands the Democrats were making. Look, the Democrats understand that the media filter advantages them. And so they don't want the president speaking directly to the public. It's part of the reason why they go crazy about his use of Twitter. So I think probably what he needs to do is just maybe even add some theatrics to some of this. Go up to Capitol Hill and knock on Nancy Pelosi's door and see if they let her in. I mean, it reminds me of an episode of The West Wing. He needs to probably do things like Facebook Live and go directly to the public. Perhaps travel to districts of conservative Democratic senators and House members. There was a report, I guess yesterday, that a bipartisan group of senators and House members were starting to meet to see if there's a way to negotiate. I think that's going to be the challenge. He needs to drive a message. What are the Democrats willing? What are they willing to offer? And just ask that question every single day. And he needs to be holding meetings every single day, putting attention on the crimes that are committed along the border and the human trafficking problems and the narco trafficking problems. So I just don't see the White House team kind of attacking this with the kind of relentlessness and focus that I think is going to be required to ultimately bend the Democrats and sort of shame them into negotiating. I think the Democrats feel like they're winning. Look, both sides think they're winning.
Yeah.
And both sides don't want to give in to the other side. They don't want the other side to be perceived as winning. And both sides' base is happy to have this fight. So until that incentive structure changes or something else fundamentally changes, I don't think this story is going to change.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak, Republican strategist. Matt, tell folks about your newsletter and also your podcast.
Yeah, we do a newsletter on Texas politics every single weekday. Over 3,000 Texans subscribe. It's called mustreadtexas.com. We take all the news from around the state, put it in one email, deliver it to your inbox every morning. You can sign up for a free one-week trial at mustreadtexas.com. The podcast is called Mac on Politics. You can find it in the iTunes Store, on Google Play, on Stitcher, on Spotify, and on the web at maconpoliticspodcast.com. Most recent episode is with A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of Real Clear Politics, and we talk about all the news in Washington. She's got an interesting take on a lot of it. You can check that out.
Very nice. Matt, as always, appreciate your time, and we'll visit with you next week.
Have a great week. Take care.
You too. That's Matt Mackowiak here on the Chad Hasty Show.